Welcome back on the 136th episode of The Leaders Who Care. I have the privilege and honor to welcome a very special guest today, someone who's dedicated a lifetime of helping the world with the work she does. I have the privilege to welcome Rita McGrath. She's the best-selling author and a really global speaker and a longtime professor at Columbia Business School, widely recognized as a premier expert on leading innovation growth during times of uncertainty, something that we all experience, and especially in the last few years. Rita has received the #1 Achievement Award for Strategy from the prestigious Thinkers 50, and is being consistently named one of the world top 10 management thinkers in a biannual ranking. Also consulting number of CEOs of the Fortune 500, and a leader who really wants to make a positive impact to the world. Once again, Rita, thank you so much and welcome on The Leaders Who Care.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here and be part of your mission.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but deeply interested in the work you do, because we share a lot in terms of the large leader, the corporate leaders, and really how to thrive and how to deal with uncertainty. Very close to my heart. I don't know why, but I have always did really well during times of crisis, and I never saw it I saw it as an opportunity. Maybe that has something to do during the last 3 or 4 crises, and maybe a natural optimist, so probably has something to do with this. But I would love to hear really more about that topic specifically, and why did you decide to choose, especially to help organizations, help leaders through the innovation during times of uncertainty? I mean, I'm sure you have a great journey behind, but was it by choice, or was it just by exploration and curiosity that you decided to do this?
Well, I was originally interested in public policy. So the roots of my desire to think about how you make better human systems goes all the way back to that. So I did my bachelor's degree in political politics, basically. And then I did my master's in public administration, and the first part of my career was really spent in the public service. So that goes very, very far back. Eventually, I did my PhD at the Wharton School, and where innovation came in was we had a grant from Citigroup to study their corporate venturing program, and that was a 3-year effort. And we did detailed biographies, detailed case studies of 35 or so of their corporate ventures, both the successful ones and the ones that didn't work. And out of that drew a lot of lessons about what corporations need to do to continuously invest in innovation and thrive.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. You also said that you experienced an unexpected opportunity to join Columbia Business School, and some twist turned into early your career. Tell us more about this.
Oh, well, people often ask me, tell me about your career path, because they hope to get some lessons about, how they plan their careers. And my advice is always, well, mine was somewhat serendipitous. So what had happened was at Wharton, which is where I was doing my PhD, we'd raised the funds to support me for a year of doing a postdoc. And I'd already finished my dissertation at that stage, so I was going to do the first papers from my publication. I was going to get to do some more research. And my friend Ming-Jer Chen, who's now at Darden at the University of Virginia, but he was at Columbia at the time, called and said, hey, we've got an opening in our strategy group this year. It's a small group. If we fill the post this year, I can't guarantee that we'll have one available when you do decide to go on the market. So why don't you come along and give a job talk? And I thought, well, what's the harm in that? I've got my PhD done, so it's just a question of putting together the talk. So I did, and went along. I thought it'd be good practice, if nothing else. So I went along, and then I got a call some months later saying, "Guess what? We met, and you're the #2 candidate on our list." And the #1 candidate at the time was a gentleman named Ranjay Gulati. He's now at Harvard, but that particular year, he just swept the job market. Every school wanted him, and he made a decision to go somewhere else. So I got the job at Columbia.
Awesome. I'm really interested in that topic personally, innovations during uncertain times. And since you do a lot of advisory and also help corporates and large organizations, um, how do you typically approach that really topic? It's everybody. So if our audience is often CEOs or C-suite leaders, they're going through. I know the role of a CEO is very difficult. Everybody wants more from them. The shareholders more money, the employees want higher salaries, the suppliers want higher prices. Everybody wants more. So and especially when you have many, we experience in unprecedented times in the last few years with inflation, with COVID, and a couple of unexpected wars in a way. It's difficult. It's not easy to operate.
No.
And traditionally, the last 10, 15 years, we didn't have to deal with it. So that requires a different level of expertise and really innovations and strategy. How do you approach this situation that we're living currently, and what would be some kind of practical high-level advices for executives to consider when they are assessing their kind of difficulties and often underperforming or declining sales? How do you approach that?
Well, I think as a CEO, you need to remember that you have this very pivotal role in the organization, that a lot of what you're doing is symbolic and communicative. And really good CEOs, I think, create the conditions under which the organization can be successful. They don't do it themselves, right? So you're doing a lot of shaping and symbolically sculpting, setting priorities. So I think the first thing I always recommend is you really need to master your own agenda. And what I mean by that is incredibly literal. What are the priorities? What really is the few things where you think you can have an impact with leverage, right? Where an action is going to have a disproportionate outcome. And you need to be very disciplined about it. It's very easy to, you can spend every minute of the day on every little thing. As you said, everybody wants something from you. So I think you have to decide what is your main focus, what is the company. The other thing that I think CEOs uniquely can do is you've got two systems you're managing at all times. You've got the system that deals with results today, but you've also got the system that's going to create results tomorrow. And what I find a lot of CEOs don't do enough is invest in a system that's going to create the future. So my recommendation is always remember that there are always two. You're always running two. And that you need to be aware that today's system has very familiar metrics and everybody knows how to do that. But tomorrow's system also has metrics, and it also has a discipline. It also has a way of doing things. It's just different than what you would do with something that's better known and better understood today. So getting on top of both of those things, I think, is really vital.
I love what you just said. So first of all, mastering your agenda sounds really simple and common sense, but actually you're right. You got to be clear of what that is and how can you bring that, and power of focus, right? Focusing on the things that can bring 10x or disproportional outcomes, as you said, and be very disciplined about this. It sounds simple, but I'm sure there's a lot into it, because you have to decide what is that involve. And at that stage, would you, if somebody wants to reach out to you and they need help with maybe clarifying what does that look like, would you help and advise to CEOs of getting their agenda, really mastering their agenda? What does that look like from a strategic point of view?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that could be anything from working with the senior team to one-on-one conversations with CEOs. The thing about CEOs is, they're people too. And because of their pivotal role in the organization, it's a really lonely job. You can't come into work and express, in many times, you can't express uncertainty, you can't express what you're really feeling. You have to have a certain presence and you have to be there for the organization. I think one of the things that we're getting wrong about leadership right now is that we're really focusing on what I'll call behaviors in the moment. So, and we're asking impossible things. So on the one hand, your leaders need to be decisive and inspiring and create this bold view of the future and move the organization forward and follow me, And then at the same time, we want them to be vulnerable and operate with humility and have all these qualities of humanness. And how do you do that? And so I'm very taken with the work of my colleague, Pretender Wadwell, who talks about what you want to have stable and what you want to be really clear about is who are you at your core, right? What is it that is your core purpose? What energizes you, mobilizes you? What's your passion? What are those things that you really, at the end of the day, stand for? What's your epitaph, right? Be very, very clear on that. But in the situation, great leadership is about doing what the situation calls for. So, let's say your team's had a big setback, right? And you personally are feeling really emotionally wrecked by this, And so you could go to your team and say, oh, yes, I know this is terrible. This is just, it wasn't fair. We've been through this awful setback. I commiserate. That's not what they need at that particular moment. What they need at that moment is say, look, it was a setback. I know it took us all by surprise, but this is not the end of the story. I have faith in you. You are the team that's going to get us through this. Let's get to work figuring out what our next step is going to be. That's what they need. They don't need you to be authentically miserable with them.
I love that. And I always advise leaders, the first reaction when there's a problem really matters. And I've seen, like, if you shout or react negatively with strong emotions that fuel to the problem, that may kill innovations. Actually, you might, because people will say, well, and maybe people taking risks, because if you react in such a way, and instead of what you just described, hey, look, I know it took us by surprise. What can we do? I believe in you. How can I support you to get through it? Then people will not feel secure, which is the basic human craving. Therefore, they say, why should I take this risk if I'm going to be made feel uncomfortable and shouted at if I fail? So, and that will ultimately lead to an inefficient team or really a lot of escalations coming to the leader, because they have to make the decision and people would defer. They wouldn't take the risk. So, and it sounds simple, but it's difficult. You have to be able to do that. And if you don't, it takes years after them to change that or remove that, because they still need reassurance that this isn't going to happen. So fear is a major factor of running, but I'm a great believer that leaders who care and lead by example outperform the ones who doesn't. By all means, in long run, in every area. But of course, that requires certain conditions, certain focus, and it's you need to be look at the metrics and the performance over a period of time. I'm curious really to hear. Can you really thrive in the midst of crisis? So let's say companies or teams are going through, as you said, a difficult moment, but can they really turn this around and actually grow when everybody else is not?
There's this fascinating pattern in human history when you think about it. People in crisis, if they feel they're part of a team, and you go back decades later and you say to them, what were the best moments of your life? What were the things that really had the most meaning for you? And very often it's not the easy times. It's the times when they came together with other human beings to accomplish something remarkable, when they were tried, when they were tested. And, I find this really interesting because we don't think of those moments as being the ones that bring out the best in us. And yet those often are. If you think about military training, for example, they'll say, it was that moment when my team and I came together and we accomplished this impossible thing. And I think we underestimate the human need for connection and bonding in those moments of crisis. So I actually think, not that we would ever seek out a crisis, not that anybody wants to be put in that situation, but when you think of how engaged we are, how together we are, when we're all together facing a common challenge. Very often those are the most meaningful times in people's lives. And so the sort of ordinary, you get up, you go to work, you have a nice day, you have a glass of wine, you go to sleep. That's not a remarkable day. The day that you overcame, you slayed a dragon or whatever it was you did, that's a remarkable day.
I love that. I love that. So this is it's really, as you say, even in scripture, every setback will be a setup to be a blessing. So it's really, you could, if you use that, if you believe you have the wisdom, and it's really important. How can you help really leaders or teams, especially when they are feeling down? And it's human nature that sometimes, it's just the hit is so big that sometimes it's like you feel, can I come back? How do you breathe? How maybe the question, restore the team's morale if it's been so bad?
Yeah, well, there's some very interesting work that Thomas Kolditz has done on, he calls it in extremis leadership. So these are leaders who deliberately put themselves in dangerous positions, right? So military people or leaders of special forces or emergency responders. And he's come to a couple of conclusions about what makes a leader succeed in those situations. And so the first thing is you want to bring down the emotional temperature, right? If people are feeling anxious and they're on edge and they're so stretched, so tight, they're going to snap. You want to introduce calm. And I think really great leaders, if you think about the great leaders in history, one of the things they're very good at is introducing calm spaces. So people can, take a deep breath, have room to breathe, take a step back from the situation, say, okay, let's think about this. So introduce calm, lower the emotional temperature. Then you want to get people focused on something bigger and outside themselves. So a task, a moment, a whatever. So, for the next 45 minutes, what I want you to do is take this pen and move it from here to there and there to here and here to there. That's what, just focus on that. Get the attention off how you're feeling. Get outside yourself. Then I think you want to also absorb uncertainty for people. And this is where I think a lot of leaders go wrong because, uncertainty is paralyzing. People don't know what to do. They're just, the answer could be this, the answer could be that. And your comment about fear really fits in here because people are afraid. So one of my favorite stories about this is I was working with an insurance company and they were introducing a new product. And to understand this story, it's important to know that in the United States, insurance products can only be introduced in states that have approved them. So how many states you can go with is a function of how many have approved. And so I'm watching this conversation between the project manager, who's the leader in this case, and the operations guy. And the project manager is asking, are you ready for the launch of this product? The operation guy's like, hum, I don't know, even maybe not. And the conversation's going nowhere. So I took the project manager aside and I said, well, why don't you tell him how many states to be ready for? And the project manager says, well, I don't know. I can't tell him that. And I said, of course you can. You're the leader in this situation. Your job is to absorb that uncertainty onto yourself and free your person up from having to bear the brunt of that. So he said, well, all right, I'll give it a try. So he goes back. He says, what if I told you I expect 15 states to be ready to go on launch day? And the change was amazing. The operations guy, all of a sudden, 15, absolutely. I can go with 15. This is the resource I would use. This is how I would do it. All this stuff. Now, what's important to know about that story is there was not single one new fact that was introduced into that conversation. What had happened was that the leader in this case had lifted the uncertainty of how many states to be ready for from the operations guy's shoulders. And the reason that matters to me is that a lot of times leaders look at the situation objectively and say, well, I don't know, so I can't do that. And yet you're the one that's got to be prepared to absorb whatever the downsides are of being wrong, right? So you need to take that burden off your people and take it onto yourself. And if you think about it, whether it's 15 or 20 or 25, they can probably figure it out when they finally get to the right answer. But as a matter of planning and functioning going forward, you need to absorb that uncertainty. So emotional temperature and get people focused outside themselves and absorb that uncertainty.
I always say I love this phrase, great leaders bring certainty in uncertain situations. Now you just given me that example and the research that you mentioned backs it up, because it was for me more of what I observed over the years. It's more what I come to my own conclusion, but now it's great to see this is backed by actually a research and people who have went to see that. So your new book is really seeing round corners. That's very interesting. Exploring how leaders can spot inflection points before they cause the disruption. I like that analogy of when you drive by night, you can see as far as the headlights go. What is after? Do you think as a whole leaders are more prone to wanting to be better at this approach post-COVID crisis?
Oh, I think there's a huge range. I think human beings are always on a continuum, right? So there are those that are very much forward thinking. They want to look into the future, even if the news isn't that great. They're anxious to get connected to reality. They're very motivated by the well-being of their firms and their organizations. And those really would be the spectrum of leaders who care. And then all the way at the other end of the spectrum, you have leaders who are more self-motivated, who are more interested in the perks and the upsides of the office, who want the trappings of success. And for them, looking into the future where the world could be really different is a threat, and so they don't take proactive steps to confront the future. So I think there's a whole continuum. What I do think is different now than perhaps a few years ago is, I think, as you mentioned, the role of the CEO has become much more multidimensional. There are many more constituencies that the CEO needs to respond to, and the publicness of the role, I think, has changed. I think the idea that leaders now are expected to take a stand on many kinds of different social issues is different. I think the fear that you could have an activist investor, you could have a challenge from a rival in a board, you could have a hostile takeover. I mean, there are a lot of things that are more causes of instability today, I suspect, than we would have had in the past. And of course, we've got a whole technological revolution we're navigating. So if you look at it in the really, really long term, what Carlota Perez, who's an Argentinian economist and someone whose work I really admire, what she would tell us is we're really in the middle of a major societal transition from the industrial era economy to a digitally informed, green, information economy. And what that will ripple through is all kinds of changes in how organizations are run, how societies operate, what we reward, where the money is going to be earned in the future. And so I think right now CEOs are in this position, got sort of one foot on what used to be certain and known, and another foot on what are we moving toward as a society. I think it's a big, big shift.
That is I'm very interested in terms of the future of strategy. If you talk about strategy, since this is a topic of deep interest to you, what we should take into account when we define, or leaders of large organizations define their strategy, and how to take advantage of all these moving stones, and especially with innovations and AI. I'm just really curious to the disruption of the strategy approach, to organizations. What are your thoughts on this in terms of best practices and the latest developments?
Oh, well, strategy, it's one of those things that I think is poorly understood by and large. And it's come over the years to mean anything important. So we have strategic procurement and strategic human resources and all this stuff. I see strategy as the central integrated concept of how we're going to achieve our goals. So the first thing is you need to be clear on what your goals are, right? So 5 years from now, what does good look like? What if this all were successful, what would that be like? And then it's a question of marshaling your resources in a way that allows you to make very substantive choices. So strategy fundamentally is about making the best choices for your organization under conditions of competition and resource limitations. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable making choices because that means you have to say yes to some things, but you also have to say no to a lot more things that may not be relevant. So I actually see strategy as more important than ever under conditions of resource scarcity. Good strategies animate. Good strategies are easy to understand. Good strategies are perhaps complex to execute, but the core of them are easy to understand. And I think that's where leaders can simplify that and bring it to life and use stories, and again, use their own personal agenda to reinforce this with their people. I think that's part of the genius of what really great CEOs are able to do.
Like often I see strategies may be good, or the strategy of the company may be good, but then the execution may not be there. And we've seen often comments too strategic or too operational. What is the right, but how can you really take a strategy and really cascade it down, especially in the large organizations like 10,000 plus people? That's not an easy thing to reach out to every single one of the group so they can act as one, which is what we want, right? The strategy should be understood by everyone, and you want alignment, but not at the top level alone. It needs to be especially the mid-level and all around. How to deploy a good strategy to actual great results?
Well, so I'm writing a new book, which is about what I call permissionless organizations. And a lot of the things we're talking about are very core to that book. So I think the first thing to realize is that if people don't understand how their day-to-day activity connects to the strategy, they're unable to help you. And as an organization grows large, what tends to happen is you have the rise of mechanisms which are serving the needs of the organization, not the needs of external parties like your customers or your ecosystem or whatever. And as bureaucracy kind of creeps in, what you start to have is a lot of people whose roles have nothing to do with the external mission of the company. So I think to really execute a strategy well, every single person in the organization needs to understand how what they do contributes to some aspect of the strategy. So that's hard work, right? You can't just let the organization burble on as a bureaucracy all by itself. You need to really connect the dots. So I'll give an example. Let's say my job is to, I don't know, respond to customer inquiries for orders. And the strategy has something to do with increasing market share. Well, you need to explain to that person, look, if a person calls up and wants a red gizmo, if you can get them to add a yellow gizmo to their order by the conversation that you have and your understanding of their needs, and if you add this yellow gizmo, that'll be great. That's increasing market share, right? And people need to have that direct connection between what they do at work and what the results are that they're trying to achieve. A company that's very good at doing this is Amazon, I would say, because they deploy what they call mechanisms. And a mechanism is not something depending on an individual remembering to do the right thing. A mechanism is hardwired into your systems and your operations, and it gives you real-time feedback loops about whether what you're doing is contributing to the strategy or not. So it's doing that hard work of saying, well, how does the work of a person on the shop floor connect to my strategy? Another way of doing this that I think is underutilized is giving people actual ownership of the company. And there are ways in which this is now being explored. So, Pete Stavros at KKR, for example, in the acquisitions that they've made in recent years, has been exploring giving not just the senior executives and the people at the top, but all the way down to the shop floor, using employee stock ownership plans to give people actual ownership in the firm. And if you think about it, in a company that makes, garage doors or something, who knows what's going to deliver quality, what's going to make something exceptionally durable, what's going to reduce time and cost in production? It's the people on the front lines. So the more tightly you can connect people on the front lines to the strategic objectives you have, the more likely it is your strategy is going to be executed.
Tell us more about the mechanism of the Amazon is using, because that's an interesting best practice. How does that work in practice? I'm just trying to imagine how.
So one of the things they do is they build in these feedback loops looking at what I'll call leading indicators. So what's the data point that would predict a later function? So Amazon's business model classically was built around a flywheel, right? And the flywheel was, we want to have more selection, because if we have more selection, that will attract customers. If we can attract customers, that will attract more vendors and buyers. If we attract more vendors and buyers, that in turn increases selection, and the whole thing becomes a virtuous circle. So when Amazon first decided to go from books to other kinds of goods, they built on that strategic model. And they said, okay, we want more selection. So product teams, what we want you to do is put up as many product pages as possible. So the first metric, right, was number of product pages. So the product teams did what they were incented to do. And they put up, bazillion product pages. And then the effect on sales, nothing. And so then they went back and revisited it. And they said, well, okay, what does it matter if there's a product page, but nobody looks at it? So the metric evolved to be product pages that people would look at. Now, here's what's interesting to me. They didn't tell the teams, this is how we want you to make sure somebody looks at your product page. They just said, make sure somebody looks at your product page. You figure out how you want to do that. And so they looked at that, and that was better, right? So that was better related to sales. But then they discovered that there was some substantial number of product pages that customers would look at where the item wasn't in stock. So then they said, well, wait a minute, that's not good. So then the metric evolved to product pages people looked at where the item was in stock. And then they said, well, let's really move forward with this and let's take advantage of Amazon's unique capabilities. And at the time this was done, remember, this is a few years ago now, Amazon was one of the few providers that could actually provide 2-day delivery just about anywhere that they served. And so the metric evolved to product pages where people looked at them. The product was not only in stock, but available for 2-day delivery. Now, once you've instrumented that, the product teams don't need a manager telling them, hey, you're messing up. The product teams can look at the data and they can evolve decisions based on their own conclusions about what the data are telling them. So they're allowing teams to self-manage by using these mechanisms.
Thank you for sharing. That's very helpful. And it's like, it sounds like the pillars are so important to know what leads to another. And often I see even large organizations may not be clear on those sometimes and how to deploy. So if anyone is in that situation, clearly, actually, what is the best way to reach out to you? Apart from buying the books you have, but if they do have interest into advisory or consultancy, what is the best way to reach out?
Oh, ritamcgrath.com is my website. So you'll find a lot of information there, a lot of videos. I publish a weekly, I call it a thought spark. These are short essays on things that I think are interesting. So you can subscribe to those on Substack, Medium, LinkedIn, wherever you like. I also have a huge video backlist on YouTube. So you can definitely look that up. But just to reach me, it's Rita at ritamcgrath.com. That's very easy. And I'd be happy to chat.
Excellent. Well, you've done impressive things and a lot of work. How do you take care of yourself?
That's a great question. Well, I think getting regular exercise and simple things like eating well and drinking lots of water, those are all really important. I try to be very deliberate about the time that I put into different sets of activities. And I try to really think about that in advance. So back to agenda, right? I try to apply that discipline to myself. I mean, I'm a human being like everybody else, so sometimes things get out of whack, but trying to make enough space in life for things that you really care about personally, I think is really important. And doing what I'm passionate about, which is learning, being curious, that kind of thing. I think, working harder is not the answer in very many cases. I think you have to really think about how do I work on the things that really matter and do that in a smart way.
Awesome. One last question, Rita, that if you had unlimited resources, what is one thing that you would like to change in the world for to live in a more caring, more better world?
Oh, I would change the structure of jobs. And here I lean very heavily into my friend Zeynep Tom's work. She's at MIT. And what she's documented is just an appalling, I don't know what to call it, tsunami of bad jobs in this country and in the world, where people are living with too little pay. Their days are insecure, their hours are insecure, they're under the thumb of toxic bosses. I mean, and that's a problem we're creating for ourselves. And it's not good for society, and it's not good for the people. And it's not even that good for the companies that are doing this. So I'd really have a major rethink about how we structure jobs.
How can we actually do that, and maybe inspire more people to look at, when you say structure of jobs, what would that look like in a practical terms?
Well, I think the first thing we have to remember is you can't think of, sorry, you can, but you stop thinking about human beings as units of cost and start thinking about them as units of possible growth and revenue. And if you flip your mindset that way, and you said, hey, this person who fulfills orders in my warehouse could actually be a source of creativity, could be a source of new ideas, could be a source of innovation, you would treat them very differently, right, than if they're just like badly performing robots. And so I think we need to, the Zeynep in her work has a whole prescription. So it's simplify and standardize the work, give decent pay, cross-train, promote from within, so people have the opportunity to advance in their careers, invest in training and development, operate with slack. And if you can do those things, you can actually free human potential from this kind of just robotic, do what the algorithm tells you, to a much more creative, much more generative way of behaving. And I think it's very inspiring what she's done. And the data, by the way, companies that operate with really bad jobs are not doing well. Over time, they just end up not being very successful. Whereas companies that employ good jobs, even in low margin industries, tend to be much more resilient. They tend to thrive much more over time.
I love that. That's deeply, really deeply touches me, because we're passionate about helping people thrive at work. And what you just mentioned, changing the structure of jobs, it just makes so much sense. What is the book that you recommended, or the research that was done on this?
Sure, there's two. One is called The Good Job Strategy, and the other is called The Case for Good Jobs. And the Case for Good Jobs is the most recent one. And it lays out like all kinds of research that show you that if employers were to take this seriously, you could do much better. There's another slightly older book, which I can also recommend. It's by Jeffrey Pfeffer, and it's called Dying for a Paycheck. And it goes through the health consequences of not providing decent, supportive jobs at work.
That's been incredibly helpful. Rita, once again, we've been really grateful for having you today. Thank you for sharing those insights and those recommendations for those books. I really love that, changing the structure of jobs, and we'll be promoting this ourselves, as we want to see a more caring world and more people thriving at work. So really, what can I say? God bless you and your team and your work. And thank you for being a Leaders Who Care and really joining us today.
Thank you so much for being able to join you.